Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a file that I think, for many of us, feels simultaneously mundane, something you might do at a pharmacy on a Tuesday lunch break. And yet, when you actually look at the mechanics, it is arguably the most sophisticated biological engineering humanity has ever achieved.
I think you're right. We're talking about vaccines and immune globulins.
We are, and it's a topic that sits right at this intersection of, well, history, public health, and deep molecular biology.
It really does. And to navigate this, we are pulling from our two heavyweights in the pharmacology world. We have Chapter 36 from Goodman and Gilman, which gives us that deep mechanistic molecular understanding, how it works.
The real nitty-gritty.
Exactly. And we are pairing it with the appendix from Katsung, which provides the clinical scaffolding, the schedules, the logistics, how we use it. It's the perfect combination of theory and practice.
And before we dive in, let's set the stage. Usually on this show, we talk about drugs that fix a problem that already exists. You have hypertension, here's a beta blocker.
Right. You have a bacterial infection, here's an antibiotic.
It's reactive, it's always damage control. But vaccines, this is different. This is what you might call anticipatory medicine.
That is the perfect framing. If we want to use a military metaphor, and immunology just loves military metaphors, traditional pharmacology is a lot like hiring a mercenary.
Okay, I like this.
The war has already started. The enemy is breaching the walls. Damage is being done. And you pay a mercenary an antibiotic to come in and fight the battle for you.
Which works, but it's messy and expensive.
It is messy, it's expensive, and sometimes the mercenaries don't arrive in time, or they cause collateral damage. Vaccination is different. Vaccination is training a standing army 5 years before the war even starts. You are drilling the troops, you are showing them detailed dossiers of the enemy, so that the second that invader steps foot on your territory, the response isn't a panic, it's an instant, overwhelming, pre-planned execution.
I love that image. Training the standing army. Because that's really the core shift here, isn't it? We aren't fighting the disease directly with the vaccine.
No.
We are teaching the body how to fight it. We are essentially turning the patient into the drug factory.
Precisely. And in this deep dive, our mission is to synthesize these two sources to really understand that training process. We are going to look at the difference between active immunity, learning to fight, and passive immunity, which is essentially just borrowing someone else's weapons for a short time.
Okay.
We will break down the different platforms, from the old-school live viruses to the really clever modern conjugate vaccines, the actual engineering behind the shot.
And we are going to look at the why behind the clinical decisions. Why do we give some shots at birth and others not until 12 months? Why do some last a lifetime and others, like the flu shot, need a booster every single year?
And, of course, we have to tackle safety. We'll look at the adverse events, the myths, and the data, framing them not as failures, but as, predictable consequences of immune education.
So, the key takeaways for you today. Active versus passive immunity, the engineering of different vaccine platforms, the whole concept of immune memory, the role of immune globulins, and the reality of safety and trust.
A full slate.
It is. But before we get to the B cells and T cells and all that, we have to go back in time, because Goodman and Gilman opens with a history lesson that is, it's a lot older and frankly, a lot grosser than I expected.
It is. We tend to think of vaccination as a pretty modern invention, maybe starting in the 20th century. But the concept of variolation, which is the precursor to vaccination, goes back centuries. Goodwin and Gilman cites Emperor Kang of China in the 17th century.
Right, and he was actually inoculating his troops and even his own children against smallpox. But the method, let's just say, it would not pass an FDA review today.
No, it certainly wouldn't. The practice involved taking the dried scabs or liquid from a smallpox pustule of an infected person, someone who had the actual full-blown disease, and either blowing that powder into the nose of a healthy person or cutting it into their skin.
Blowing infectious scabs up the nose. That is a vivid image. It sounds like a great way to start a plague, not stop one. What was the logic there?
The observation, which was quite brilliant, was that if you introduced the virus through the skin or the nose, rather than inhaling it naturally deep into the lungs, which is how smallpox usually spreads, the resulting disease was milder.
So it was still smallpox?
Oh, yes. You still got sick, you were still contagious,
Sure.
but the mortality rate dropped, and it dropped significantly.
We have to talk about the risk calculation here, because today, if a vaccine has a 1 in a million serious side effect, it's headline news. Back then.
The context is everything. Smallpox, in its natural form, had a mortality rate of 20 to 30%.
That's staggering. 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people who got it would die.
They would. With variolation, the death rate dropped to about 2 to 3%.
So you're trading a 1 in 3 chance of death for, what, a 1 in 50 chance?
In the 1700s, that is a winning lottery ticket. And this brings us to a character I found fascinating in the reading, Lady Mary Montagu.
Yes, the aristocrat.
She was wife of the British ambassador to Constantinople in the early 1700s.
Yeah.
And she had survived smallpox herself. It was a brutal experience. She lost her eyelashes. She was scarred for life. And she saw this practice of variolation in Turkey.
And she didn't just see it, she did something about it.
She had her own son inoculated there, which was incredibly brave. And when she returned to London, she championed the practice. She actually had her daughter variolated in England during an epidemic, which was, a huge public statement.
But she faced significant resistance, and this is where we see the first anti-vax movement, effectively.
We do, and it wasn't just medical skepticism, it was deeply religious.
The sources mention Cotton Mather and Dr. Zabdiel Boylston in Boston around the same time.
Right. They were pushing for variolation during a terrible smallpox outbreak in Boston in 1721. And they faced violent opposition. There were preachers quoting the book of Job, arguing the disease was a punishment or a trial from God.
So to prevent it was to interfere with divine will.
Exactly. They argued it was interference, that you were playing God. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. It got so heated, there was even a grenade thrown through Cotton Mather's window with a note attached to it.
A grenade. Wow.
So this tension between public health measures and personal or religious belief, it's not new. It's been there from day one.
But variolation, at the end of the day, was still using the actual smallpox virus. It was dangerous. The real game changer came with Edward Jenner.
1796. This is the birth of vaccination proper. And Jenner made a crucial observation in the English countryside. He noticed that milkmaids, women who spent their days milking cows, almost never got smallpox.
They had that famous peaches and cream complexion.
Because they didn't have the pockmarks. But they did catch something else.
They caught cowpox.
Yes, a mild disease from the cows that caused some lesions on their hands, maybe a slight fever, but it wasn't fatal. Jenner hypothesized that the cowpox was somehow protecting them, that it was training their immune system to recognize its much deadlier cousin, smallpox.
So he decides to test it. And this is the experiment that, frankly, would land him in jail today.
Oh, immediate imprisonment. He took pus from a cowpox lesion on a milkmaid's hand. Her name was Sarah Nelms, and he inoculated an 8-year-old boy, James Phipps.
His gardener's son, I believe.
That's right. The boy got a little sick with cowpox, then recovered quickly. Then a few weeks later, Jenner did the unthinkable. He inoculated the boy with actual lethal smallpox.
Good ultimate challenge trial.
And nothing happened. The boy was completely immune, and thus the term vaccine was coined from vacca, the Latin word for cow. It shifted the entire paradigm from giving a small dose of the poison, which was variolation, to giving a harmless look-alike.
A much, much safer approach. Okay, so that's the history. We moved from blowing scabs up the nose to using a cow virus. Now let's get into the pharmacology. When Jenner put that cowpox into James Phipps, or when I get a flu shot today, what is actually happening inside the body? Goodman and Gilman goes into really deep detail on this mechanism.
To understand this, we have to distinguish between the two main arms of our immune system, the innate and the adaptive.
Let's break those down.
The innate system is your first responder. It's the castle walls and the guards at the gate. It includes your skin, your mucus, and general infantry cells like macrophages and neutrophils.
They're not specialists.
Not at all. The innate system attacks anything that looks foreign. It's incredibly fast. We're talking minutes to hours, but it is not specific. It doesn't really know what it's fighting.
It shoots at anything that moves.
Exactly. It doesn't know what it is fighting, just that it shouldn't be there. But if the pathogen breaches that wall, the innate system calls in the specialists, the adaptive immune system. This involves your B cells and your T cells.
This is the standing army we talked about earlier.
This is the standing army. The adaptive response takes time, days, or even weeks to fully spin up. It has to identify the specific enemy, clone an army of cells that match that enemy perfectly, and then deploy them.
And that lag time. That's when you get sick.
Yeah. That's it. That's when the virus is replicating unchecked, while your special forces are still in boot camp.
But once they fight it off, and assuming you survive.
Once they fight it off, most of those clone cells die off. But a few remain. These are the memory cells. They are the veterans. They sit quietly in the bone marrow and the lymph nodes, and they wait.
For years.
For decades, sometimes a lifetime. If that specific bug shows up again, even 10 years later, Those memory cells recognize it instantly. The secondary response is exponentially faster and stronger than the primary response ever was. The invader is wiped out before you even know you were exposed.
So the goal of a vaccine is to cheat the system. We want to create the memory cells without the risk and misery of that primary infection where the virus is winning for a week.
We want the training montage without the actual war. And speaking of training montages, Goodman and Gilman describes a really cool process called antibody class switching. I like to think of this as the immune system upgrading its weapons technology over time.
Okay, so let's unpack the different classes of antibodies, because the source lists a few key players: IgM, IgG, IgA, and IgE. What's the difference?
So when a B cell first encounters a pathogen, the first antibody it produces is IgM. You should think of IgM as the first draft. It's a massive molecule. It's actually 5 antibodies stuck together in a pentamer. It kind of looks like a big snowflake.
It's big and clumsy.
It is huge. It's great at clumping things together, a process called agglutination. But it doesn't have a very tight grip. It has low affinity. It's a blunt instrument.
It's a club.
It's a club. But as the immune response matures, and with critical help from T cells, the B cells undergo this class switching and something called affinity maturation. They basically go back to the drawing board and refine their weapon.
And they start producing IgG.
They do. And IgG is the sniper. It's much smaller, it penetrates into tissues much better, and it binds to the pathogen with incredible strength and precision. This is the main antibody in our circulation. About 70 to 80% of your antibodies are IgG.
And the source mentions that IgG is usually the target for vaccines, right? That's what we're trying to generate.
Yes. When we measure titers in your blood to see if a vaccine worked, we are usually measuring the concentration of these high-affinity IgG snipers. They are the gold standard for long-term protection.
Okay, well, what about the others? What about IgA?
IgA is the bouncer. It hangs out in your mucus, your tears, your gut, your breast milk. Its job is to stop the pathogen right at the door on the mucosal surfaces before it even gets into the body proper.
So it guards the entry points.
It guards the doors, and IgE is the alarm.
Mm-hmm.
It's present in very low concentrations. It deals with parasites. But in the modern world, it mostly just gives us allergies by triggering histamine release.
Got it. So the vaccine stimulates the first draft, IgM, and then pushes the body to develop a whole army of snipers, IgG. Now, Katsung and Goodman and Gilman both make a really big distinction between two main strategies of immunization, active and passive. We touched on this in the intro, but let's go deeper.
This is fundamental. Active immunization is what we typically mean when we say vaccination. You give the antigen, the flag of the enemy, and the patient's own body does all the work of building the army and the memory.
Pros and cons.
The big pro.
Yeah.
It lasts a long time, often years, sometimes a lifetime. It creates that memory we discussed, both antibody memory and T-cell memory. The con, it takes time. You don't get protection the day you get the shot. It takes weeks for that standing army to fully train up.
Which brings us to passive immunization. This is the mercenary approach you mentioned.
Right. In passive immunization, we aren't asking your body to do anything. We are taking preformed antibodies, IgG, that was made by someone else or something else, and injecting them directly into you.
The classic analogy is active is teaching a person to fish. Passive is giving them a fish.
Or maybe a fish stick, because it gets consumed very rapidly. That's the big con of passive immunity. Antibodies are just proteins. They get degraded and cleared by the body. The half-life of IgG is about 23 days.
So it's temporary.
Very temporary. You get immediate protection. That's the pro. But in a month or two, it's all gone. And crucially, no memory is created. If the bug comes back 6 months later, you are completely defenseless again.
Let's talk about where we get these mercenary antibodies. I was looking at table A3 in Katsung, and it lists a whole arsenal of these immune globulins. Some are from humans, but some are from horses.
Yes, the sources are critical here, and they have different risks. First, we have natural passive immunity, which is what happens between a mother and her fetus.
Okay.
IgG is small enough to cross a placenta, so the baby is born with a full complement of the mother's immunity. It's a beautiful system that protects the infant for the first few months while their own system is still coming online.
And then there's artificial passive immunity.
This is what we use in the clinic, and this is where the human versus animal distinction really matters for safety. Human immune globulin, often just called Ig or IVUG for intravenous, is pooled from the plasma of thousands of blood donors. It's a collection of all the antibodies circulating in the general population. It's generally very safe because it's human protein.
And what do we use that for?
We use it for things like post-exposure prophylaxis for measles or hepatitis A, or for people with immunodeficiencies who can't make their own antibodies.
But then there are the antitoxins and antivenoms, and those often come from horses or sheep.
Right. If you get bitten by a black widow spider or a rattlesnake, or if you have a case of botulism, we don't have enough human donors with high levels of antibodies against those specific rare toxins. So we do something else.
We turn an animal into the factory.
Exactly. We hyperimmunize a horse or a sheep. We inject the animal with small, non-lethal doses of the venom or toxin, let them build a massive antibody response, and then we harvest their serum, which is now rich in those specific antibodies.
But injecting horse protein into a human sounds risky.
It is. The human immune system is very smart. It recognizes the horse antibodies as foreign proteins and can mount an attack against them. This can cause a condition called serum sickness, fever, rash, joint pain, even kidney issues that shows up about a week later.
Or worse, anaphylaxis right away.
Or worse, anaphylaxis. That's why, as Katso notes, we often have to do a skin test for sensitivity before giving an equine antitoxin. Or we only use it in life or death situations where the risk of the toxin clearly outweighs the risk of the reaction.
So if I'm bitten by a black widow, I'm taking the horse serum and I'll deal with the potential rash later.
Exactly. It's an emergency brake. You pull it when the crash is imminent.
Ketzen also details some specific clinical scenarios where we use this passive immunity. One that stood out to me was rabies. It seems like a unique case where we use both active and passive at the exact same time.
Rabies is fascinating and absolutely terrifying. It's essentially 100% fatal once symptoms start, but it has a vulnerability, which is it travels very slowly from the bite wound up the nerves to the brain. This gives us a window of opportunity, but it's not a big window.
What?
We don't have time to wait weeks for a vaccine to work all by itself.
So what's the protocol?
We do a bridge. We give both at once. First, we infiltrate the wound itself with rabies immune globulin. That's the passive part. We're putting mercenaries right on the battlefield to neutralize the virus at the entry site immediately.
Holding the line.
Holding the line. And at the same time, in a different spot, usually the arm, we give the first dose of the rabies vaccine. That starts the active process of your body building its own long-term standing army. It's a beautiful strategy.
That is incredible. It's holding the line with mercenaries while the standing army gets its boots on.
Another crucial one mentioned in the texts is RHD, immune globulin or RhoGAM. This is a huge success story in obstetrics.
For preventing hemolytic disease of the newborn.
Exactly. If an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive baby, during delivery, some of the baby's blood can enter her circulation. Her immune system sees the Rh-positive cells as foreign and creates antibodies. That's no problem for the first baby, but for the next Rh-positive baby.
Her antibodies can cross the placenta and attack the fetus's red blood cells.
Right. By giving the mother passive antibodies, the RhoGAM, right after delivery, we essentially mop up and hide the baby's blood cells from her immune system. She never gets sensitized in the first place. It has saved countless infants.
It's pharmacological camouflage. Okay, so that's passive immunity. Let's pivot back to active immunization, the vaccines themselves. Goodman and Gilman breaks these down into different platforms. It's not just one way to make a vaccine, it's an engineering problem. How do you show the immune system the bad guy without letting the bad guy actually win?
Correct. And there are several strategies, each with a very specific trade-off between efficacy and safety.
Yeah.
The oldest and often most effective method is the live attenuated vaccine.
Attenuated means weakened, right?
Yes. We take the actual virulent virus like measles, mumps, rubella, MMR, or varicella, which is chickenpox, and we pass it through cell cultures in the lab over and over and over again.
So it adapts to the lab environment.
It does. Eventually it gets really good at living in a test tube, but it loses its virulence, its ability to cause severe disease in a human. But, and this is key, it's still alive. It can still replicate in the body, just very slowly.
So it mimics a real infection very closely.
That's the huge benefit, because it replicates, it creates a massive, robust, and long-lasting immune response. You get both antibodies and that powerful cellular T-cell immunity. It engages the whole system. Often 1 or 2 doses will give you lifelong protection. It is the most efficient teacher because it looks the most like the real enemy.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
There is. Because it is a live virus, there is a tiny theoretical risk it could revert to a virulent form, though that's extremely rare with modern vaccines. The bigger issue is for immunocompromised people, like someone with advanced HIV/AIDS or on high-dose chemotherapy, or for pregnant women.
Their systems can't handle it.
Their immune systems might not be able to control even a weakened virus. It could cause a disseminated infection. So live vaccines are generally contraindicated for them. Also, they usually require refrigeration, which makes the cold chain for distribution tricky in developing countries.
Okay, so if leave attenuated is too risky for some people, what's the alternative?
The inactivated or killed vaccine, this is the Salk polio vaccine, the hepatitis A vaccine, the standard injectable flu shot. You take the pathogen and you kill it, usually with heat or chemicals like formalin.
Yeah.
It's dead. It cannot replicate. It cannot cause disease.
Safe as houses then.
Very safe.
Yeah.
And very stable. You can often freeze dry them, which is great for transport. But because the pathogen isn't replicating and spreading through the body, the immune system doesn't take it quite as seriously. The signal is much weaker.
So you need more reminders. You need to shout louder.
Exactly. You need boosters.
Yeah.
Multiple doses. And often you need adjuvants, which are chemical additives to wake up and alarm the immune system, which we will definitely discuss in more detail later.
Now, this next category is where I felt like I really learned something new and profound, the subunit and conjugate vaccines. This addresses what the books call the disguise problem.
This is one of the most clever pieces of immunology. The idea is sometimes you don't need the whole germ, you just need a specific piece of it, a key surface protein or a sugar from its coat. The hepatitis B vaccine is a great example. It's just one surface antigen protein made harmlessly in yeast cells. Very safe, very effective.
But then there's the issue with bacteria that wear a disguise.
The polysaccharide capsule. This is a huge deal. Some of the most dangerous bacteria, especially for children, like Haemophilus influenza type B, Hib, and pneumococcus or meningococcus, they coat themselves in this thick, slimy layer of sugar.
Which hides them from the immune system.
It hides them specifically from the part of the immune system that infants rely on. An adult immune system can eventually learn to recognize these sugars. But infants, their immune systems are immature. They are T-cell dependent. They literally cannot see these pure sugar coatings very well.
They are blind to the threat.
Completely. And for decades, this was a disaster. These bacteria caused deadly meningitis and pneumonia in thousands of babies, and we couldn't vaccinate against them because the pure sugar vaccines, the polysaccharide vaccines, simply didn't work in kids under 2.
So how did they fix it? This seems like an impossible problem.
They hacked the system. It's a truly brilliant solution. They took the sugar molecule, which the baby's immune system can't see, and they chemically tied it. They conjugated it to a protein that the immune system does recognize very well, like a diphtheria toxoid or a tetanus protein.
They stapled the invisible sugar to a giant neon sign.
That is the perfect analogy. The infant's immune system spots the familiar protein. Aha, I know this guy. And it brings it in to be processed. But in doing so, it is forced to process the attached sugar too. It recruits T-cell help, which was the missing piece. Suddenly the sugar is no longer invisible.
And the baby makes antibodies to the sugar.
A strong, T-cell-dependent, long-lasting antibody response to the sugar. This technology conjugate vaccines like PCV13 and Hib has practically wiped out bacterial meningitis from those causes in the developed world. It's a massive victory for chemistry and immunology.
That is brilliant. It's like hiding broccoli in a brownie so the kid will eat it.
Or putting a kick me sign on an invisible man so you can finally see him.
I like that better.
Yeah.
Finally, on platforms, there are toxoids. This is for things like tetanus and diphtheria.
Right. With tetanus, the bacteria itself isn't the main problem. It's the incredibly potent neurotoxin it releases. The Clostridium tetani bacteria stays in the dirty wound, but the toxin travels to the spinal cord and causes the horrific muscle spasms.
So you don't need to fight the bug, you need to fight its weapon.
Precisely. The vaccine doesn't target the bug at all, it targets the toxin. We take the pure toxin, we inactivate it with chemicals, so it's harmless. Now it's called a toxoid. And we train the immune system to make antibodies that neutralize that specific molecule.
So even if the bacteria is in your wound pumping out poison if you are vaccinated, your antibodies are there to soak it all up before it can cause any damage.
Correct. And since the bacteria is everywhere in the soil, you can't eradicate tetanus from the earth. Maintaining that individual immunity with boosters is crucial.
Okay, so we have our standing army, and we have our different weapons platforms, live, killed, subunit. Now we need the battle plan. This is where Katsung comes in with the school schedule. Why is the childhood vaccination schedule so specific? Why 2 months, 4 months, 6 months? Why not just get them all done on day 1 and be done with it?
It's a very carefully choreographed logistical dance, and there are 2 main factors that dictate the timing. First, the infant's own immune system needs to be mature enough to mount a good response.
And second,
we have to deal with those maternal antibodies we talked about earlier.
the passive immunity from mom, it gets in the way.
It gets in the way. Remember, the baby is born with a fleet of mom's IgG antibodies circulating in their blood. If a baby is full of mom's antibodies against measles, and you give a live measles vaccine at 1 month old,
And mom's antibodies will just kill the vaccine virus.
exactly, mom's antibodies will do their job too well. They will attack and neutralize the vaccine virus before the baby's own immune system even gets a chance to see it and learn anything.
So it cancels out the lesson.
It completely cancels it out. The maternal mercenaries are still on patrol, so you have to wait for them to leave the territory before you can start training the baby's own standing army. That's why the first dose of MMR is typically given at 12 to 15 months of age. By then, maternal protection has waned enough for the vaccine to take hold.
That makes so much sense. But there is one exception. Hepatitis B. That's the only one we give right at birth.
Yes, and there's a critical reason for that. If the mother is infected with Hep B, she can transmit it to the baby during the process of birth. And if a baby gets infected that young, their immune system is very tolerant to it. There is a 90% chance they will fail to clear the virus and become a chronic carrier for life.
Which leads to liver cirrhosis and liver cancer down the line.
A terrible outcome. We have absolutely zero margin for error there, so we have to intervene immediately within hours of birth with both the vaccine and the passive hepatitis B immune globulin to stop that transmission from ever taking root.
Wow. That brings us to polio. Goodman and Gilman tells the tale of two vaccines, Salk versus Sabin. This is a classic medical history debate.
It is, and it's a perfect example of how there isn't always one best tool. We have the Salk vaccine, or IPV, which is the killed virus given by injection, and the Sabin vaccine, or OTV, which is the live attenuated virus given as oral drops.
I remember reading that the oral vaccine was a huge deal because it was so easy to give. No needles, just a drop on a sugar cube.
That was a massive advantage for mass vaccination campaigns. But it also had a key biological advantage. Because you swallow it, the live weakened virus replicates in your gut.
Okay.
It creates powerful mucosal immunity. That's our friend IgA, the bouncer in the intestines. This means if a wild polio virus comes along later, the gut immune system stops it from ever replicating and getting into the bloodstream. You don't just protect the person from paralysis, you stop them from shedding the virus to others. It breaks the chain of transmission.
So it's better for herd immunity.
Much better. And even more wild, the vaccine virus itself sheds in the stool for a while. So it can actually spread to unvaccinated close contacts and immunize them secondhand. It would travel through the sewer systems and passively immunize parts of the community.
That is unbelievable. So why don't we use the oral vaccine in the U.S. anymore? It sounds amazing.
Because of that risk that comes with any live virus. Very, very rarely, about one case in every 2.4 million doses, the oral vaccine virus can mutate back to a form that causes paralysis itself. This is called vaccine-associated paralytic polio, or VAPP. Once we had successfully eliminated wild polio from the United States, the only cases of polio we were seeing were the ones being caused by the vaccine.
So the risk-benefit ratio completely flipped on its head.
It flipped entirely.
Yeah.
When wild polio is rampant, the tiny risk of the vaccine is trivial compared to the risk of the disease. But when wild polio is gone, that tiny vaccine risk becomes unacceptable. So in the year 2000, the U.S. switched exclusively to the Salk-injected killed vaccine.
Which can't cause polio.
It can't. It creates strong humoral immunity, IgG, in the blood, so it protects the brain and spinal cord. The person will not get paralyzed. But, and this is a crucial nuance, it doesn't sterilize the gut as well as the oral vaccine. A person vaccinated with IPV could theoretically get an asymptomatic gut infection with wild polio and, while not getting sick themselves, still shed it to others.
That is a critical distinction. So for global eradication, you need the oral vaccine to stop transmission. But once it's gone from a region, you switch to the injected one to eliminate the last shred of risk.
It's a brilliant phased public health strategy.
Okay, let's talk about the influenza shapeshifter. Why do I need a flu shot every single year, but I only need a tetanus booster every 10 years?
Because the tetanus bacterium and its toxin don't change. Influenza, on the other hand, is a master of disguise. The virus has surface proteins, hemagglutinin and neuraminidase, the agent N in H1N1, that are constantly mutating. This is called antigenic drift.
Small changes, year to year.
Small changes. But they're enough that the antibodies you made against last year's virus don't recognize this year's virus very well. It's like the virus puts on a fake mustache and glasses. Your immune system's memory is partially fooled. So every year, global scientists have to predict which strains will be circulating and update the vaccine recipe.
An antigenic shift is the really scary one.
Shift is the big one. That's when the virus, which has a segmented genome, swaps whole chunks of genetic material, usually with a bird or a pig influenza virus. That can create a completely new, novel virus that no one on the planet has any pre-existing immunity to. That's what causes pandemics.
I want to touch on cancer vaccines. We usually think of vaccines for infectious bugs, but the sources list hepatitis B and HPV as anti-cancer vaccines.
They absolutely are, and it's a powerful way to think about them. Chronic hepatitis B infection creates decades of inflammation that is a primary driver of hepatocellular carcinoma, or liver cancer. By preventing the virus, we prevent the cancer. It's that simple.
And HPV?
Human papillomavirus is even more direct. The virus itself contains oncogenes that directly mess with your cell's DNA, forcing them to divide uncontrollably. It's the primary cause of cervical cancer and a major cause of anal and head and neck cancers. The HPV vaccine is, quite literally, a vaccine against cancer.
That is an incredible public health tool. Now let's move to Section 5, Safety, Society, and the Future. This is, for many listeners, the elephant in the room. Vaccines are unique in pharmacology because we give them to millions of healthy people, mostly children, so the tolerance for side effects is extremely low.
It's essentially zero, and that's appropriate. If you are dying of cancer, you will accept a drug that makes you vomit or lose your hair because the alternative is death. If you are a healthy 2-month-old baby, the parents and society expect the vaccine to be as close to perfectly safe as humanly possible.
Let's start by talking about adjuvants. The source calls them substances added to boost the immune response. Some people get worried when they see aluminum on the ingredient list of a vaccine.
Aluminum salts, like aluminum hydroxide, have been used safely as adjuvants for almost a century, and they are absolutely necessary for those killed in subunit vaccines we talked about.
Why?
Remember, the kill virus, or the single protein, doesn't replicate. It's a very weak, a quiet signal to the immune system. The aluminum acts as a local irritant, a highlighter, that calls the innate immune system to the injection site. It creates a little depot of inflammation that says, hey, pay attention to this protein over here. This is important.
It's the caffeine for the immune system.
That's a great analogy. Without the adjuvant, the immune system would barely notice, and the vaccine simply wouldn't work. And it's important to note the amount of aluminum is tiny less than you get from food or water in your daily life.
Okay, we have to address the myths. Goodman and Gilman is very explicit and direct about the autism myth.
It is, and it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that vaccines, specifically the MMR vaccine cause autism, stems largely from a single small paper published in 1998 by Andrew Wakefield. That paper has been not just debunked, but fully retracted.
And the author lost his medical license.
He did, because the paper was found to be fraudulent. Wakefield had major financial conflicts of interest he didn't disclose. He was being paid by a law firm to find a link and was developing a competing measles vaccine. And he manipulated the data on the children in the study.
And the sample size was tiny, right?
12 children. That's it. And based on that one fraudulent paper, a global panic started. But science works by replication and overwhelming evidence. Since then, extensive studies by the CDC, the Institute of Medicine, looking at hundreds of thousands, even millions of children in places like Denmark, Finland, the US, they have all shown zero link between the MMR vaccine and autism.
What about thimerosal, the mercury-based preservative?
This was another concern. Thimerosal contains ethyl mercury. It was used as a preservative to prevent dangerous bacterial contamination in multi-dose vials of vaccines. It is chemically distinct from methylmercury, which is the toxic kind found in some fish that accumulates in the body. Ethyl mercury is cleared from the body very rapidly.
But they took it out of most childhood vaccines anyway.
They did, back around 2001, as a precautionary measure to reduce the total mercury exposure in infants from all sources.
Yeah.
But here's the smoking gun against the theory. After thimerosal was removed from childhood vaccines, autism rates continued to rise.
Which is the opposite of what you'd expect if it was the cause.
Exactly. If thimerosal was the cause, rates should have plummeted. They didn't. The continued rise is much better explained by better and earlier diagnosis and a broadening of the definition of the autism spectrum.
That's a very clear data point. But let's be honest, there are real adverse events from vaccines. We can't say they have zero risk.
No medical intervention in history has zero risk. The sources list the real ones. The most common are things like a sore arm, redness at the injection site, a low-grade fever. These are actually signs the immune system is working.
And what about fainting?
Adolescents often faint, a vis of vagal syncope, after getting a shot, not because of what's in the vaccine, but because of the needle, the anxiety, the sight of blood.
Okay, and the rarer, more serious ones.
Febrile seizures. A sudden spike in fever can trigger a seizure in a small percentage of toddlers. It's terrifying for parents to witness, but medically, it is usually benign and leaves no lasting damage. There is a small but real increased risk of this with the combined MMRV vaccine.
And Guillain-Barré syndrome, or GBS, I've heard that linked to vaccines.
This is an autoimmune condition where the body attacks its own nerves, causing temporary and sometimes severe paralysis. It was associated with a specific swine flu vaccine back in 1976. The risk with modern flu vaccines is estimated at about 1 extra case per million doses. But here is the kicker, and this is critical.
What's that?
Getting the actual flu virus carries a significantly higher risk of triggering GBS than the vaccine does.
So the calculation is always this. The virus is riskier than the vaccine.
Almost without exception.
Yeah.
And we have systems to catch these things. The RotaShield story from the late 90s is a great example of the safety system working. A new rotavirus vaccine was released. The post-market safety monitoring system picked up a signal that it might be causing a rare but serious bowel problem called intussusception.
So what happened?
The vaccine was pulled from the market immediately. The risk was small, but it was deemed too high for a universal childhood vaccine. The new rotavirus vaccines we use today are much safer, but they are still monitored very closely for this specific risk.
It shows they're watching. The system is working.
It shows the bar for safety is incredibly high, as it should be.
Ketson brings up a really interesting legal and societal point regarding liability. Why can't you just sue a vaccine manufacturer in the usual way in the United States?
This goes back to a crisis in the 1980s. The U.S. is a very litigious society, and lawsuits over rare adverse events were becoming so common and so expensive that manufacturers simply stopped making vaccines. It wasn't profitable, the liability risk was too great. We were facing a national shortage of basic childhood vaccines.
Which is a public health emergency.
A massive one. So the government stepped in. They reasoned that vaccines are a unique public good. They rely on herd immunity. If I get vaccinated, I'm also protecting you. So they created the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, or VICP.
A special court.
It's a no-fault system. A small tax on every vaccine dose goes into a trust fund. If you believe you have a plausible injury from a vaccine, you bring your case to this program. If it's deemed credible, the fund pays you, not the manufacturer. This keeps the manufacturers in the business of making life-saving vaccines while still providing a safety net for the very rare individuals who have a serious reaction.
It's a fascinating solution to a market failure. It acknowledges that vaccines benefit the herd, so the herd, through the government, absorbs the tiny residual risk.
And that concept of herd immunity is really the final piece of the social puzzle. We vaccinate not just for ourselves, but for the grandmother on chemotherapy, for the newborn baby who is too young for their first shots, for the person with an organ transplant.
They can't be vaccinated, so they rely on the rest of us.
They rely on a wall of immunity in the community to protect them. And the sources are clear that when vaccination rates drop due to myths or complacency, diseases like measles come roaring back.
And measles is the canary in the coal mine.
It is, because it is so incredibly contagious. You need about 95% of the population to be immune to stop its spread. If that number drops to 90% or 85%, you will see outbreaks immediately. We have seen this in recent years across the U.S. and Europe. It's a stark reminder that these diseases haven't vanished. They're just held at bay by that standing army we've all built together.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to our metaphor. We have moved from blowing smallpox scabs up the nose to genetically engineered protein conjugates delivered by a highly scheduled, highly monitored system.
It's an incredible journey from, just raw observation to sophisticated molecular engineering. We have the school schedule from Katzen ensuring the logistics and timing work, and the molecular machinery from Goodman and Gilman explaining exactly why that IgG spike happens on a cellular level.
And the key takeaways for our listeners to really hold on to.
I'd say first, understand that fundamental difference between active, which is teaching, and passive, which is borrowing immunity. Second, know your platforms, why a live vaccine is different from a killed one, and why conjugate vaccines were such a breakthrough.
Right.
Third, respect the timing. The schedule exists for a very real biological reason. And finally, trust the safety data. The risk of the disease is almost always orders of magnitude higher than the risk of the vaccine designed to prevent it.
I think my biggest takeaway, the idea that has really stuck with me, is this concept of the patient as the drug factory.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. In most of pharmacology, we are putting a foreign chemical into a black box and hoping it fixes a broken gear. With vaccines, we are giving a blueprint to the black box and saying, build your own defenses. It empowers the organism itself. It's the ultimate preventive medicine.
Knowledge is the best booster. I like that. We encourage you all to open up Goodman and Gilman, Chapter 36 in the Katsung Appendix. The tables alone, especially on travel vaccines, are worth the price of admission.
Absolutely. There is so much nuance in the specific agents that we couldn't possibly cover for things like yellow fever and typhoid and Japanese encephalitis. The principles we discussed apply to all of them.
Thanks for diving deep with us. Stay curious and stay immunized.
Stay healthy.